Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we are going deep on something pretty foundational.
Yeah, definitely fundamental.
We're looking at the Constitution of Nepal,
Right?
and we've got the actual document itself as our source material today.
Correct.
And, well, what we're going to do is try to pull out from this the key principles, the rights that are guaranteed or outlined in this Constitution for the Nepali people,
Hmm.
and the way that this document sets up the structure of the government.
Sounds good.
So this is your crash course on Nepali law and society as seen through the lens of its most important legal document.
Right. And right away, I think the first thing that jumps out at you when you're reading this is that it's the supreme law
Oh, yeah.
in Nepal. It clearly states it's the fundamental law of the land, and anything inconsistent with it is void.
Right.
So it creates this hierarchy right away. And even more fundamental than that, it says that all sovereignty and state power is inherent in the Nepali people.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's that principle of popular sovereignty.
So it sounds like it's, well, there's not sounds like, it is starting out by saying this is the most important thing, and the people are the ones who have the ultimate power here.
Exactly.
So beyond that, what are some of the kind of like core aims or interests that it seeks to uphold for Nepal?
Well, it defines the national interest of Nepal.
Okay.
And it says that it's comprised of national security, economic well-being, and prosperity of the people.
Okay, so it's kind of like a trifecta there.
Yeah.
You have to have the security, you have to have the economics, and the people all have to be kind of working together.
It does make you wonder, like, how those things get balanced
Yeah.
or prioritized at different times.
Especially when you think about the incredible diversity in Nepal. How does the Constitution address something like the linguistic landscape?
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting because it takes a very inclusive approach.
Okay.
All mother tongues spoken in Nepal are recognized as national languages.
Wow.
So it's really trying to acknowledge that diversity.
That's a lot of languages.
Right. But it also says Nepali in the Devanagari script is the official language.
Okay.
And so that would be for like government and administrative purposes.
Okay, so there's sort of an official one, but there's a recognition of all these other ones.
Right. But then it goes on to say that the provinces can choose to designate an additional official language.
Oh, interesting. So it's almost like states' rights in the U.S. where each state can kind of make certain decisions.
Right.
Or a province in this case.
Exactly.
That's pretty interesting. Now, the way you become a Nepali citizen is laid out in the Constitution, right?
It is.
And so I guess let's start with what is probably the most common way, citizenship by descent. How does that work in Nepal?
Okay, so citizenship by descent is granted if your parents were citizens at the time of your birth.
Okay.
Or before the commencement of this constitution, because obviously
Right, this is a new...
it's a new document.
Yeah.
There's also a special provision about anyone who obtained citizenship by birth before this constitution. They can acquire citizenship by descent upon attaining the age of majority.
So you're born before the Constitution. You have the right to become a citizen by descent once you become an adult.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the case for people who are born into it. But what about people who are not born into Nepali citizenship?
Yeah, so there's also naturalized citizenship.
Okay, how does that work?
And that is granted to people who permanently reside in Nepal and who haven't acquired the citizenship of any other country.
So no dual citizenship.
Right.
You have to be all in on Nepal.
Yeah, and then the specific procedure and conditions are determined by the federal law.
Okay.
But there's a specific provision that says anyone born in Nepal, if their parents both acquire citizenship at the time of the child's acquisition of citizenship, the child can acquire citizenship by descent.
Oh, so that's interesting. So if you're born in Nepal and your parents both become citizens, you become a citizen by descent even though you weren't born to citizens.
Right, because it's when you acquire citizenship.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting how they've thought about all these edge cases.
Now, beyond citizenship by descent and naturalization, are there any other kind of categories that the Constitution touches on?
Yeah, there are.
Okay, what are those?
So there's honorary citizenship,
Okay.
which the government can grant to distinguished persons.
Yeah, like an honorary doctorate or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And then there's non-resident Nepali citizenship.
Non-resident, okay.
And this granted to people who were citizens either by descent or birthright, but they've
Welcome
acquired
back, everyone, to
citizenship
the
of a
deep
foreign
dive.
country.
Today,
Okay.
we are
But
going
it's not
deep
any
on
foreign
something
country. It has to be
pretty
a foreign country
foundational.
other than a SARC
definitely
country.
fundamental.
Okay, so other
We're
than
looking at the
the
Constitution
South
of
Asian
Nepal.
Association for
And
Regional
we've
Cooperation,
got,
Right.
so
the
you
actual
can't be in that
document
region.
itself as our source
Right.
material today.
Interesting.
And so what that means
And
is if you were a
what we're going
Nepali
to do is
citizen, you've
try to
gone
pull
somewhere
out
else, but
from
you've
this
stayed in that region,
the
you
key
don't qualify
principles,
for
the
this.
rights that are
But if you've gone
guaranteed or
outside of
outlined
the
in this
region,
Constitution for the
then you can
Nepali
become a
people,
non-resident Nepali
and the way
citizen.
that this
and that
document
gives you
sets up the
certain
structure of the
economic,
government.
social, and
So
cultural
this is
rights.
your
Okay, so you still
crash
have some
course
connection.
on
Right.
Nepali law
Pretty
and
interesting.
society as seen
And then
through
the
the
final
lens of
thing
its
is that
most
if
important
new
legal
territory is
document.
acquired
right
by
away,
Nepal,
I think
Okay.
the first thing that jumps out at
the
you when you're
residents of
reading
that
this is
territory
that,
can be
it's the supreme
Nepali
law.
citizens.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
determined
In
by
Nepal.
law.
Right.
Okay.
So they've thought of
Clearly
every
states
possible
it's
way.
the fundamental
they've
law of
covered
the
all their
land,
bases.
and anything
Yeah.
inconsistent
Now,
with it
beyond
is
just
void.
like the different
Right.
ways
So it
to
creates this
become a
hierarchy
citizen,
right away. And even more
it
fundamental
also
than that,
addresses
it
like
says that all
kind of
sovereignty and
documentation
state
and
power
inclusivity, right?
is inherent in the
It
Nepali
does.
people.
So tell me about that.
Interesting.
So
Yeah, it's that
anyone who
principle of
is
popular sovereignty.
entitled to
So it
citizenship
sounds
by
like
descent
it's
can
not sounds like
obtain a
it is
citizenship
starting out by
certificate
saying
with their
this is the
gender
most
identity
important thing,
Okay.
based
and
on
the
either their
people
mother
are
or
the ones who
father's
have
name.
the ultimate power here.
Interesting.
So it's
Exactly.
really
So
interesting
beyond
and
that,
really
what are some of the
inclusive
kind of
how
like
they've thought about
Yeah.
core
family structures
aims or
and
interests
how that
that it
impacts someone's gender
seeks to
identity and the
uphold
ability to
for
get
Nepal?
citizenship.
Yeah,
Well,
so
it
you don't have
defines
to
the
follow the
national interest of
traditional kind of
Nepal.
patrilineal
Okay.
system.
And it says that it's
Exactly.
Very cool.
comprised of national
Now,
security,
after the
economic
Constitution
well-being, and
establishes,
prosperity
you know,
of the
kind of the
people.
basis of the
Okay,
state
so
and the
it's kind of like a
citizenry,
trifecta there.
Yeah.
You
it
have to
then
have the
gets
security,
into
you
a
have to have the
really big
economics, and the
section
people
all
have to be
about
kind of working
fundamental
together.
rights.
It does
It
make you
does.
wonder, like,
So I guess
how
this
those
is where we
things,
really see
get
like the
balanced
core
or
protections that are
prioritized at different
guaranteed
times.
to
Especially when
every
you think about the
individual living in
incredible
Nepal.
diversity
Yeah.
in Nepal.
So it starts out with a really powerful
How does the
statement.
Constitution address something
Every
like the
person has
linguistic
the
landscape?
inherent
Oh,
right
yeah, that's really
to
interesting
live
because
with dignity.
Okay.
it takes a very
And then
inclusive
immediately after
approach.
that, it says
Okay.
the death penalty
All
shall not
mother
be
tongues
imposed.
spoken in
So
Nepal
you have the right
are
to life.
recognized
Yes.
as national
Very
languages.
So that shows you
Wow.
that
So
they
it's really
really
trying to
value
acknowledge that
human
diversity.
life.
That's
human
a lot of
life.
languages.
So obviously,
But it
beyond
also
just
says
the right to
Nepali
live with dignity
in
and
the
the right to
Devanagari
life,
script is the official language.
there are a bunch of other
Okay.
freedoms
And
that
so
are
that would be for,
guaranteed
like,
to
government
Nepali
and
citizens.
administrative
there are.
purposes.
What are
Okay,
some
so
of
there's
those?
sort of
Okay,
an
so some of the
official
freedoms
one,
that
but
are
there's a
guaranteed
recognition
are
of all these
freedom
other
of
ones.
opinion and
Right.
expression,
But then
Okay.
it goes on
freedom
to say
to
that the
assemble
provinces
peacefully
can
and without
choose to
arms,
designate
Okay.
an
freedom to
additional
form
official
political
language.
parties,
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. So it's
freedom
almost
of
like
movement and
states'
residence
rights
within
in the
Nepal,
U.S. where
and
each
freedom
state
to
can kind of
practice
make
any
certain
occupation,
decisions,
trade, or
Right.
or a
business.
province in
Okay,
this
so
case.
a lot of the
Exactly.
freedoms
That's
we
pretty
enjoy here in the
interesting.
West as
Now, the
well.
way
Yeah.
you become
Now,
a
these
Nepali
freedoms,
citizen is
as with
laid out
all
in the
rights, they're
Constitution,
not
right?
absolute.
It is.
Right.
There are
And
some
so I guess let's
limitations
start
placed
with
on these freedoms.
what is probably
There
the
are.
most
So I guess
common
tell me
way
why that is and what are some of those
citizenship by
limitations.
descent.
Okay, so
How does
Yeah.
that
these
work in
freedoms
Nepal?
can
Okay, so
be subject
citizenship by
to
descent
reasonable
is
restrictions,
granted
but it's
if your
only in
parents
the
were
interest of the
citizens at the time
sovereignty
of your
and
birth.
territorial
Okay.
or
integrity
before the commencement
of
of this
Nepal,
Constitution,
national
because
security,
obviously.
Right, this
public
is a new.
order,
It's a new document.
decency,
There's
or
also
morality.
So the
special
classic
provision
things that
about
you know,
anyone
threaten the existence
who
of the
obtains
state.
citizenship by
or
birth
also
before
they
this
say for the purpose
Constitution.
of maintaining
They can acquire
harmonious relations
citizenship
between
by
different
descent
religious communities.
upon attaining
Okay,
the age
interesting.
of
So you
majority.
can't use your
So
freedom
you're
of
born
speech
before
to
the
incite violence.
Constitution. You
Exactly.
have the
Very
right
cool.
to become a citizen
And one other
by
thing is that
descent once you
generally the
become an
state
adult.
cannot create
Yeah.
monopolies.
Interesting.
Okay.
Exactly.
So
Okay,
they're really trying
so
to foster competition.
that's the case for people
there
who
are
are born
some
into it. But
economic
what about
rights
people who are
implied there
not
as well.
born
Yes.
into
Okay.
Nepali citizenship?
Now moving on
Yeah,
to
so there's
another
also
really important
naturalized
kind of
citizenship.
core
Okay, how does
tenet
that work?
of
And that
I
is
think
granted
most modern societies, and that's
to
the idea of
people who
equality.
permanently
So
reside
how
in
does the
Nepal
Constitution
and who haven't
address
acquired
this principle
the
of
citizenship
equality?
of any
Well, they
other
start by
country.
saying
So
all
no
citizens
dual
shall
citizenship.
be
Right.
equal
You have to be
before the
all
law
in on
Okay.
Nepal.
and shall be
And then the
entitled to
specific
equal protection of
procedure
law.
and conditions
Sounds
are
pretty
determined
standard
by
so
the federal
far.
law.
Yeah,
Okay.
but
But
then
there's
they
a
go on to
specific
say that there shall
provision
be
that
no
says
discrimination in the
anyone
application of
born in
general
Nepal,
laws based on origin,
if their parents
religion,
both acquire
race,
citizenship
caste,
at the time of the
ethnicity,
child's acquisition
sex,
of
gender,
citizenship,
language,
the
age,
child can
marital
acquire
status,
citizenship by
pregnancy,
descent.
Oh, so
disability,
that's interesting. So
health
if you're born in
status, place of
Nepal
birth,
and your
descent,
parents
or
both
any
become
other
citizens,
status.
Wow,
you
that's a
become a
pretty
citizen by
comprehensive
descent, even though
list.
you
It
weren't
is.
born
Yeah.
to
So they've
citizens.
really
Right,
thought about
because
all the
it's when you
different
acquire
all the
ways.
possible
That's pretty
protected
interesting.
classes.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
really interesting
So they're
how
really
they've thought
trying
about all
to
these edge cases.
Now,
enforce this
beyond
principle of equality.
citizenship
So
by
this sounds
descent
very
and
similar to,
naturalization,
you know,
are there
kind of the
any
way
other
that we
kind
in
of
the West have thought about
categories that
equality.
the Constitution
Is there
touches
anything that's
on?
different in the
Yeah, there
Nepali
are.
context?
Okay, what are those?
Yeah. So it goes
So
on to
there's
say,
honorary
nothing shall
citizenship,
prevent the
Okay.
making of
which the
special
government can
provisions by
grant
law
to
for the
distinguished
protection,
persons.
empowerment,
Yeah,
or
like an
advancement of
honorary
the socially
doctorate or something.
or
Exactly.
culturally
Yeah, okay,
backward
cool.
women, children,
And then there's
elite indigenous
non-resident
nationalities,
Nepali
like Hizitori
citizenship.
Muslims,
Non-resident, okay.
minorities, or
And
persons
this
with disabilities.
granted to people
Okay,
who
so
were
this
citizens
is that
either by
idea
descent
of
or
what was it,
birthright,
substantive
but
equality
they've
versus
acquired
just like
citizenship of a
equality on
foreign country.
paper.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So
But
they're
it's
not just
any
saying
foreign country.
everyone
it has
is
to be a foreign
equal.
country other
They're
than a
saying
SARC
we
country.
need to address
so
the
other
historical
than the
inequalities
South
Right.
Asian
and actually
Association
make
for
things equal in
Regional
practice.
Cooperation,
Right.
they
Exactly.
can't be in
Very
that
cool.
region.
And then they go on to say,
Interesting.
all
And so what that
offspring
means is
shall
if
have
you were a
equal
Nepali
right to
citizen, you've gone
ancestral
somewhere else, but
property.
you've stayed in
Interesting.
that
Yeah.
region.
So that's
you
kind of
don't
a
qualify
gender
for this.
equality
But
thing.
if you've gone
Exactly.
Yeah, very
outside
cool.
of the region,
Now, beyond just kind of
then you can
equality in
become a
general, the
non-resident
Constitution
Nepali
also has a
citizen,
lot to say
and that
about
gives
our
you
ability to
certain
communicate
economic,
It does.
freely.
social, and
Yeah.
cultural
So tell me
rights.
about
Okay,
that.
so you still
So
have
the
some
Constitution
connection.
says
Right.
no person shall
Pretty
be subjected to censorship.
And then the final thing is that if
And
new
it also
territory
talks
is
about
acquired by
publication,
Nepal,
Okay.
broadcasting, and other means of
the
communication,
residents of that
including
territory
electronic
can
ones.
be
Oh, okay.
Nepali
So they're
citizens.
thinking
That's
ahead to the
determined by
internet
law.
and all that.
Right.
They are.
So they've
Very
thought of
cool.
every
Well, they're
possible
saying
way.
that those
Yeah,
things
they've
are
covered
free
all
from
their bases.
censorship.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Now,
again, there's
beyond
exceptions.
just like
There's always
the different
exceptions,
ways
right.
to become
So
a citizen,
reasonable restrictions can be
it
imposed
also
by law.
addresses like
Okay.
If
kind
it's
of
in the interest of the
documentation and
sovereignty,
inclusivity, right?
territorial
Yeah,
it does.
integrity,
So tell me about
national
that.
security,
So anyone who
public
is
order,
entitled to citizenship by
decency,
descent
or
Mhm.
morality.
can
So pretty much
obtain
the
a
same.
citizenship
Right.
Things as
certificate
before.
with their gender
Yes.
identity.
Anything to do
Okay.
with
Based on either their
inciting
mother or
violence
father's
and
name.
things like that.
Exactly. And then it goes on to
It's
say
really
the
interesting
means of
and really
communication,
inclusive how
like
they've
the
thought
press and
about
telephone, shall
family
not be
structures
arbitrarily interrupted.
and how that impacts someone's
Okay.
gender
So
identity
you can't
and the
just
ability
cut
to
off
get
someone's phone
citizenship.
or shut down
Yeah,
a
so you don't have to
newspaper.
follow the
Gotcha.
traditional kind of
Interesting. So
patrilineal
there's a lot of
system.
really
Exactly.
robust,
Very cool.
I guess you could
Now,
say,
after
protections
the
for
Constitution
communication.
establishes,
And
you
that
know,
makes
kind of
sense.
the
I mean,
basis
that's
of the
kind
state
of
and the
the
citizenry,
bedrock of a democracy, right?
it then gets
Is the
into a
ability
really
to-
big section
speak
all
freely.
about fundamental
Yeah.
rights.
So I guess that
It
makes
does.
sense why they're
So I guess
putting
this
so
is
much
where we
emphasis
really
on it here.
see
Okay.
like the core
Now, moving on to the
protections that
justice
are
system.
guaranteed to every
What kinds of
individual living in
safeguards are
Nepal.
in place
So
for
it starts out
people
with a really
accused
powerful
of
statement.
crimes?
Okay.
Every
so
person has the
every person
inherent
who is
right
arrested
to live
shall have
with
the right to be
dignity.
informed at
And
the
then
time
immediately
of such
after that it
arrest
says the death
of
penalty
the
shall
grounds
not be
for such
imposed.
arrests.
So you
Okay.
have the right
They
to
also
life.
have the right to
Yes.
consult
Very
with
cool.
and be
So that shows
defended
you that
by
they
a legal
really
practitioner
value
of their
human
choice
life.
from
Human
the time
life.
such person
So
is arrested.
obviously beyond just,
And
you
then
know,
it says
the right to
every
live with
person
dignity and
arrested
the
and
right to
detained in
life,
custody
there are a
shall
bunch
be
of other
produced before
freedoms that are
judicial authority
guaranteed to
within a
Nepali
period of
citizens.
24
there are.
hours.
What are some of
24
those?
hours.
Okay, so
Yeah.
some of the
Okay,
freedoms
so
that are
that's pretty
guaranteed are
strict.
freedom
It
of
is.
opinion
Yeah,
and
that's a
expression,
good
Okay.
protection.
freedom to
Right.
assemble
against,
peacefully and
you know,
without
being
arms,
arbitrarily
Okay.
freedom to
detained and
form
disappearing.
political parties,
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Are
freedom
there
of
any
movement
other
and
kind of
residence within
protections in
Nepal,
place
and
for the
freedom to
accused?
practice
Yeah,
any
there are a
occupation,
bunch.
trade,
Okay,
or
what are
business.
those?
Okay,
So
so
no
a lot of
person
the
shall be
freedoms we
deemed
enjoy here
guilty
in the
of
West
an
as well.
offense
Yeah.
unless
Now
so
these
proved by law.
freedoms,
Okay, so
as
that's
with all
innocent
rights,
until
they're
proven
not
guilty.
absolute.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Right.
There are
No
some
person shall be
limitations placed
prosecuted
on these
and
freedoms.
punished for the
There
same
are.
offense
So I guess
twice.
tell me
Okay,
why
so
that
no
is and
double
what are some of
jeopardy.
those
Right.
limitations.
No
Okay,
person
so
who is accused of an
these
offense
freedoms
shall be
can
compelled to be a
be
witness
subject
against
to
himself or
reasonable
herself.
restrictions.
Oh, okay, so that's
But
the
it's
Fifth Amendment
only
right
in the
to not
interest of the
incriminate.
sovereignty
Exactly.
and territorial
Every
integrity
person shall have the
of
right to be
Nepal,
informed of the
national
nature
security,
and cause of the
public
accusation
order,
against him or her.
decency, or morality.
Every person
the
shall have the
classic
right to a
things
fair
that,
trial by an
threaten the
independent,
existence of the
impartial,
state.
and
Yeah,
competent
or
court or judicial
also
body.
they say for
Yeah,
the purpose
okay.
of maintaining
An indigent
harmonious
party
relations
shall have the right
between
to obtain
different
free
religious
legal aid from the
communities.
Okay,
state
interesting. So you
as
can't use your
provided
freedom of
for by
speech
law.
to incite
Okay,
violence.
so if
Exactly.
you can't afford a
Very cool.
lawyer, the
And
state
one other
will
thing
provide
is
one
that
for you.
generally
Right.
the state
Very
cannot
cool.
create
Yeah.
monopolies.
So they've really
Okay.
thought
So
about
they're
all
really
the
trying to
different ways
foster
to ensure
competition.
that
So there are
process.
some
due
economic
process is
rights
protected.
implied there
Yeah.
as well.
Yes.
Very
Okay.
cool.
Now moving on to
Now, beyond the
another
rights
really
of the
important kind of
accused,
core tenet of
the Constitution
I think,
also
most
has
modern
some language
societies, and
about
that's the
people
idea
who
of
have been harmed
equality.
by
Yeah.
crime.
So how does
does.
the
What does it say about them?
Constitution
Okay,
address
so
this
every
principle
victim of a
equality?
crime
Well, they
shall
start
have the
by
right
saying all
to
citizens
information
shall be
about the
equal
investigation
before the
and
law,
proceedings
Okay.
of the
and shall be
concerned crime.
entitled to equal
And
protection of
every
the law.
victim shall
Sounds
have the
pretty
right
standard so
to
far.
justice,
But
to
then they go
social
on to say that there shall
rehabilitation,
be no
and to
discrimination in the
compensation
application of general
as provided
laws
for by
based
law.
on origin,
Interesting.
religion,
Yeah, so they're really trying to make
race,
sure that
caste,
victims of crime are taken
ethnicity,
care of.
Yeah, so
sex,
not
gender,
just the
language,
accused have rights,
age,
Right.
the
marital
victims
status,
have rights
pregnancy,
as well.
disability,
Very
health health
Interesting.
status, place of
And
birth,
beyond
descent,
just kind of
or any
general
other
crime
status.
victims,
Wow, that's a pretty
the Constitution
comprehensive
also
list.
talks
It
about
is.
Yeah.
So they've really thought
kind of
about all the different
mistreatment
ways.
at
All
the
the
hands of the
possible
state.
protected
It does.
classes.
Exactly.
Right, so like
So they're
torture,
really trying
arbitrary
to
detention.
Yeah.
What does it say about
enforce
that?
this
Okay, so
principle of
no
equality.
person
So
shall be
this sounds
subjected
very
to physical
similar
or mental
to,
torture.
kind of the way that
Okay.
we in the West have
And
thought about
anyone who so
equality.
suffers
Yeah.
Is
shall
there
have the
anything
right to
that's
obtain
different in the
compensation.
Nepali context?
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
And
so
then
it
for
goes on to say,
preventative detention.
nothing shall
Okay.
prevent the making
No
of special
person who is
provisions by
arrested
law
shall be detained in
for the
custody
protection,
without informing
empowerment, or
his or her
advancement of the
family members
socially
or
or
relatives.
So that's
culturally
good. At least people
backward
know where
women,
you are.
children,
Yeah.
Okay.
No
Dalit,
person
indigenous
shall be subjected
nationalities,
to preventative
like Easy-Going
detention
Muslims,
except on the
minorities,
grounds of the
or
existence of
persons with
sufficient
disabilities.
evidence of his or
Okay,
her
so this is
involvement
that
in
idea
an act of
of
creating an immediate threat to
substantive
the
equality
sovereignty or
versus just like
territorial
equality on
integrity of
paper.
Nepal
Yeah,
or
exactly.
public
So they're
order.
not just saying
Okay, so you
everyone
can't
is
just
equal.
detain people
They're
willy-nilly.
saying
Right.
we
There has
need
to be
address
some
the
reason.
historical
Yeah.
inequalities.
Very cool.
Right.
And they go on to
actually
say
make
that the
things equal in
specific procedure
practice.
and conditions for
Exactly.
preventative
Very cool.
detention
And then they go
shall
on
be
to say,
determined by
all
law.
offspring shall
Okay,
have
so
equal
they're not
right
laying
to
out all the
ancestral
specifics
property.
here,
Right.
but
Yeah.
they're at least
So
setting
that's-
some
So that's kind of a
guidelines.
gender
So the
equality thing.
legislature, whoever,
Exactly.
Yeah,
has
very
to,
cool.
Now,
come up with
beyond just
something
kind of
that fits
equality in
within those
general, the
guidelines.
Constitution also
Very
has a lot
cool.
to say about our
Now,
ability
one of
to
the,
communicate.
It does.
historically,
Freely.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
So the
sensitive
Constitution
topics in
says no
Nepal
person shall be
is the
subjected
issue of
to censorship.
untouchability
Okay.
and caste-based
And it
discrimination.
also talks
So
about
how does the Constitution
publication,
address
broadcasting,
this
and other means of
problem?
communication,
Okay, so it says
including electronic
untouchability
ones.
and any
Oh,
discriminatory
okay,
act
so they're
based on
thinking ahead
caste,
to the
tribe,
internet and all
origin,
that.
They are.
community,
Very
profession,
cool.
or
Well, they're
physical
saying that
condition
those things are
shall
free
be
from
prohibited
censorship.
and
Okay.
punishable
But
by
again, there's
law in
exceptions.
all
There's always
spheres of
exceptions,
public and
right.
private
So
life. No
reasonable
person
restrictions
shall
can
be
be imposed
subjected
by
to
law.
any form
Okay.
of
If
discrimination
it's in the interest of
in
the
the use of
sovereignty,
public places,
territorial
goods,
integrity,
services,
national
facilities,
security,
or on
public
any other
order,
grounds based on his or her
decency,
origin,
or
caste,
morality.
So
tribe,
pretty much the
community,
same.
profession,
Right.
or
Things as
physical
before.
condition.
So it's
Yes.
really
Anything
laying
to
down
do
the
with
law there.
inciting
No discrimination at
violence
all.
and things like
Right.
that.
Very
Exactly.
cool.
And then it
No
goes on to say
person
the
shall be
means of
deprived of his or her
communication,
right
like
to
the press
acquire,
and
own,
telephone,
sell, and
shall not
otherwise
be
deal with
arbitrarily
property
interrupted.
in any part of
Okay.
Nepal
So you can't
on the
just
grounds
cut
of
off
his or
someone's
her
phone or
origin,
shut down a
caste,
newspaper.
tribe,
Gotcha.
community, profession,
Interesting. So
or
there's a
physical
lot of
condition.
really
Okay, so
robust
property
I
rights
guess
are
you could say
protected.
protections
For
communication.
everyone, regardless of caste.
And that makes
Right.
I mean
Very
that's
cool.
kind of the
No person
bedrock
shall
of a
propagate in
democracy,
any
right?
manner an
Is the
ideology
ability
based on
to
discrimination
speak freely.
on grounds of
Yeah.
caste
So
or
I guess that
tribe
makes
or
sense why they're
superiority
putting so much
or
emphasis on it
inferiority
here.
of any
Okay.
caste or tribe.
Okay, so you
Now
can't even
moving
say
on to the
that.
justice
Right.
system.
You know, one caste is better
What
than the
kinds
other.
of
Exactly.
safeguards are in
Workplace
place
discrimination
for
on the
people
basis of
accused
caste shall be
crimes?
prohibited
Okay,
and
so
punishable by law.
Every person
Okay.
who is
So
arrested
they've really thought
shall
about
have
All the
the
different
right to
aspects
be
of life,
informed
where
at the
this could
time
come up.
of such
They've
arrest.
really tried to create a
of the grounds
comprehensive
for
System
such
to
arrest.
stamp
Okay.
out discrimination.
They also have the
Yes.
right to
Very cool.
consult with and be
Now,
defended by a legal practitioner
moving on
of
to
their
economic
choice from the
rights,
time
the
such person is
Constitution
arrested.
guarantees the right
Okay.
to property.
And then it says,
right.
every
It does.
person
So what does that
arrested
mean,
and
and are there
detained
any
in custody
limitations on it?
shall be produced
Okay,
before
so
judicial authority within a
Every
period of
citizen
24
shall
hours.
have the right
24 hours.
to
Yeah.
acquire, own,
Okay, so that's
sell,
pretty
and otherwise
strict.
deal
It
with
is.
property.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
a good
But it's subject to
protection
this.
Right.
Okay.
against
All such
being
matters
arbitrarily
relating to
detained and
property shall be
disappearing.
regulated
Exactly.
by
Okay.
law
Are there
and
any
subject
other
to the
kind of
payment of
protections
taxes
in
levied
place
by
for the
law on a
accused?
progressive
Yeah, there are a
basis.
bunch.
Okay,
Okay,
so
what are those?
the
So
government
no
can
person
tax.
shall be deemed
Right.
guilty
And they can
of
tax
an
more
offense
if you have
unless
more.
so
Exactly.
proved by law.
And then it says nothing
Okay,
shall
so
prevent
that's
the state from
innocent
making
until
laws to
proven guilty.
requisition,
Right.
Okay, cool.
acquire,
No
or
person shall be
create any property
prosecuted
for
and
public
punished for
interest
the same
by
offense
providing
twice.
compensation.
Okay, so
Okay,
no
because they
double
can
jeopardy.
take your land.
Right.
No person
But
who
they
is
have to
accused
pay
of an
you for it.
offense
Yeah.
shall be
Okay, cool.
compelled to be a witness
And then
against
finally,
himself or
nothing shall
herself.
prevent the state from
Oh,
enacting
okay, so
laws
that's
to
Fifth
reform
Amendment right
land
to
ownership
not
and
incriminate
management
yourself.
for the
Exactly.
purpose of
Okay.
increasing
Every person
agricultural
shall have the right to
productivity,
be informed of the
protecting the
nature and
environment,
cause
or
of the
settling
accusation
landless
against
or
him or her.
squatters,
Okay.
or for
Every
any other
person
public
shall have the
interest.
So
right
they
to a
can
fair trial by
redistribute
an
land if they need
independent,
to?
Yeah,
impartial,
they can,
and competent
but they
court
still
or
have to
judicial
provide
body.
compensation.
Yeah, okay.
An
So it's
indigent
not
party
quite
shall have the
like,
right to
I
obtain
don't know,
free legal
like,
aid from the state.
You know the
as
communist
provided for by
revolutions where
law.
they just
Okay,
seize it,
so if you can't
take
afford
it
a
all.
lawyer,
Yeah,
the state
they
will
have to
provide
actually
one
pay
for
you for
Right.
it. Okay,
Very cool.
so there
Yeah.
are some
So they've
limitations
really
on the right
thought
to
about all the
property, but for
different
the
ways
most
to
part, you do
ensure
have that
that
right.
Yes.
due
Very
process
cool.
is protected.
Now,
Yeah.
freedom of
very
religion is
cool.
another one of those
Now, beyond the rights
really
of the
important fundamental
accused,
rights, I think,
the
in most
Constitution also has
places
some
around the
language
world.
about
Mhm.
people who
How
have
does
been
the
harmed by
Nepali
crime.
Constitution
What does it say about
guarantee
them?
freedom
Okay,
of
so
religion?
Okay,
Every
so
victim
it
of
says
a
every
crime
person shall
have
be
the
free
right
to profess
to
practice
information
and protect his
about
or
the
her
investigation
religion
and
according to
proceedings
his
of
or
the
her
concerned
faith.
crime.
Yeah.
And
Every
every
religious
victim
denomination
shall have
the right
to
to operate and
justice,
protect
to
its
social
religious sites and
rehabilitation,
religious
and to
trusts as
compensation
regulated by
as
law.
provided for by law.
No person shall
Interesting.
act or
Yeah,
make
so they're
others
really trying to make
act
sure that victims
by
of crime
using
are taken
any
care of.
means
Yeah,
against
so not
public
just
health,
the accused
decency,
have
and
rights,
morality,
Right.
the victims
or
have
breach
rights as
public
well.
peace,
Yeah.
Very
or
interesting.
convert another person
And
from one
beyond just
religion
kind of
to another,
general crime
or
victims,
any act or
the
conduct
Constitution
that
also
may
talks about
jeopardize others' religion,
kind of
and such
mistreatment at the
act
hands of the
shall be
state.
punishable
does.
by
Right,
law.
so like torture,
So that's a lot
arbitrary
in one
detention.
sentence.
Yeah.
What does
It
it
sounds
say
like
about
they're
that?
saying you have
Okay,
the right
so
to
no
practice
person
your religion,
shall be subjected to
but
physical
you can't,
or mental
you know,
torture.
incite
Okay.
violence or
And
do anything
anyone who
that's
so
harmful,
suffers
Right.
or
shall
try to
have the right to
forcibly
obtain
convert deport someone.
compensation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So they're
And then
trying
for
to create a
preventative
balance.
detention.
So
Okay.
it's freedom of
No
religion,
person who
but
is
within the
arrested shall be
bounds
detained
of
in
Public
custody
order.
public
without
order.
informing
Yeah.
his or
Now,
her family members or relatives.
beyond
At least
those
people
kind of
know where you are.
core
Yeah.
rights,
Okay.
like the right
No
to
person
property, the
shall
right
be
to free
subjected
speech,
to preventative
freedom of
detention
religion.
except on the
The
grounds of the existence
Constitution
of
goes on
sufficient
to outline a
evidence
whole
of
bunch of
his
other
or her
rights.
involvement
It does.
in an
So
act
I guess
of
just give me
creating
like a
an
broad
immediate threat
overview of what are
to the
some of those other
sovereignty or
rights.
territorial
so
integrity
some of the other rights
Nepal or
include right
public
against
order.
exploitation.
Okay, so you
Okay.
can't just
and that
detain
includes
people
trafficking,
willy-nilly.
slavery,
Right.
forced
There has to be
labor.
some reason.
Yeah.
There's a
Very
right
cool.
to clean
And they go on
healthy
to say that
environment.
the specific procedure
And
and
if your health
conditions
is
for
damaged
preventative
due to
detention
environmental pollution,
shall be determined by law.
you have a right to compensation.
Okay, so they're not laying
Okay.
out all the specifics here.
Right.
but
right to
they're at least
education,
setting some
Okay.
guidelines.
which includes
so the
free and
legislature,
compulsory
whoever,
education
has
up to
to,
the basic level
come up with
and
something
free
that fits
education
within
up
these
to
guidelines.
secondary
Yeah.
level.
Okay.
Very cool.
And there
Now,
are
one of
special
the,
provisions for citizens
historically,
with disabilities
guess,
or those from
sensitive
economically
topics in Nepal
disadvantaged
is the
backgrounds.
issue of
Okay.
There's
untouchability and
also right to
caste-based
language and
discrimination.
culture.
So how does the
Okay.
So
Constitution
everyone
address
has the right
this
to
problem?
use their mother
Okay, so it
tongue
says
and participate
untouchability in any
cultural life.
discriminatory
Okay.
act based on
And then
caste,
there's the right
tribe,
to
origin,
employment.
community,
And
profession, or
unemployment
physical
benefits
condition
shall be
shall be
provided as
prohibited and
determined by
punishable by
federal law.
law in all
Okay.
spheres
So
of
it's
public
kind of
and
like a
private
social
life.
safety net.
No person
for
shall
people
be
who are
subjected to
unemployed.
any
Exactly.
form of
Okay.
discrimination
And I know that the
in the use
Constitution
of
also
public
goes on
places,
to,
goods, services,
kind of
facilities,
guarantee certain
or
rights for
on
specific
any other
groups
grounds
within society.
based on
Yes,
his or
it
her
does.
origin,
So tell me about
caste,
those.
Okay, so
tribe,
some of the
community,
rights
profession, or
relating
physical
to health
condition.
So it's really laying down the law
right
there.
to
Yeah.
No
free
discrimination at
basic
all.
health
Right.
services.
Very cool.
No person shall
everyone
be
shall have the
deprived of
right
his or her right to
relating
acquire,
to
own,
food
sell,
and food
and otherwise
sovereignty
deal
as
with
provided
property
for by law.
in any part of Nepal
Every citizen
on
shall
the
have the
grounds
right
of
to
his or her
appropriate
origin,
housing
caste,
as
tribe,
provided for
community,
by law.
profession,
Okay.
or physical condition.
Women
Okay,
shall
so
have equal lineage
property rights
rights
are protected
without any
Yeah.
for
discrimination
everyone,
to paternal
regardless
property,
of caste.
as
Right.
well as
Very
to obtain property
No
acquired
person
by
shall
her
propagate
through her
in
efforts.
any manner an
Okay, so
ideology
again, this is
based on
kind of
discrimination
reinforcing
on
that
grounds
gender
of caste or
equality.
tribe or
Oh.
superiority
Every
or
woman shall
inferiority
have
of
the
any
right to
caste or
safe
tribe.
Okay, so you
motherhood
can't
and
even say
reproductive
that.
health.
Right.
Okay.
One
Women
caste
shall
is
be
better than
protected
the
from
other.
all
Exactly.
forms
Okay.
of violence,
Workplace
including domestic
discrimination
violence.
on the
Okay.
basis of
Women
caste
shall have the
be
right to
prohibited
participate
and
in all
punishable
state
by law.
bodies on
Okay.
the basis of the
So they've really
principle
thought
of
about
All the different
proportional
aspects
inclusion.
of life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where this could come
Women
out.
shall have
They've
equal
really
right
tried to create a
to special
comprehensive
opportunity
system to
in
stamp out
education,
discrimination.
employment,
Yes.
health,
Very
and
cool.
Social Security.
Now,
Okay, so they're really trying
moving
to
on to
address
economic rights, the
historical
Constitution guarantees
inequality
the right
that
to
women have
property.
faced.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does.
So what does that mean, and
Children
are
shall
there
have the
any
right to live with
limitations on
dignity.
it?
Okay.
Every
Okay,
child
so
shall have the right to name identity. and
every
family
citizen
care.
shall have
Every
the right
child shall
to
have the
acquire,
right to
own,
basic
sell,
needs,
and otherwise deal
including
with
education,
property.
health care,
But it's
food
subject to
shelter,
this.
and
Okay.
recreation.
Wow.
All such matters
Every
relating to
child shall be
property
protected from
regulated by
exploitation,
law
abuse, and
and
violence.
subject to the
Okay.
payment of taxes
All shall
levied
have the
by
right
law
to
on a
proportional
progressive
inclusion in the
basis.
state
Okay,
bodies
so
and
the
special
government can
opportunity
tax,
in education,
and they can tax more
employment,
if you
health,
have more.
and Social
Exactly.
Security.
Okay.
And then it
The
says
electorate shall
nothing
have
shall
the right
prevent the
to
state from
land
making
and
laws to
housing.
requisition,
The electorate shall have the right
acquire,
to
or
education
create any
scholarship
property for
and
public
Social
interest
Security.
by
Okay.
providing
The electorate
compensation.
shall have the right
Okay,
to
'cause they can take
participate
your
in the
land.
public service
Right.
as
But they have to
provided
pay
for
you
by
for it.
law.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
The state shall
And
protect
then finally,
promote the
nothing shall
traditional
prevent the state from
occupation of
enacting
adulthood.
laws to
Okay.
reform
Senior
land ownership and
citizens
management
shall have the
for
right
the
to
purpose of
special
increasing
protection and
agricultural
Social Security.
productivity,
Okay.
protecting the
Socially
environment,
backward
or
women,
settling landless or
indigenous
squatters,
nationalities,
or for any other
Mahizzi
public
Tharu
interest.
So they
Muslims,
can redistribute
oppressed
land
class
if they need
minorities,
Yeah, they
and
can.
persons with
Okay.
But they still
disabilities
have to
shall
provide
have the right to
compensation.
participate in the state
So it's not
bodies
quite
on the
like,
basis of the
I don't know,
principle
like,
of proportional inclusion.
you know the communist
Economically, socially,
revolutions
or
where they just
educationally
seize it,
backward groups
take it all.
shall have the
Yeah.
right to
They have
special
to actually pay
opportunity
you
in
for it.
education,
Okay, so there are some
employment, health,
limitations on
and
the right
Social
to property,
Security
but for the most
as
part, you do
provided
have
for
that
by
right.
law.
Yes.
Okay.
Very cool.
Every person
Now,
with disabilities
freedom of religion is
shall have
another
the
one
right
of
to live
those
with dignity,
really
respect,
important fundamental
protection,
rights,
and
I think,
security.
in
Okay.
most
Persons with
places
disabilities
around the
shall have the
world.
right to
Mhm.
proportional
How does the
inclusion
Nepali
in the state bodies
Constitution
and special
guarantee
opportunity
freedom of
in education,
religion?
employment,
Okay, so
health,
it
and
says
Social
every
Security
person shall be
as
free to
provided
profess
for by law.
practice
Okay.
and protect his
Every
or
victim
her
of
religion
conflict shall have the
according
right to
to his or her
rehabilitation,
faith.
relief, compensation,
Every
and
religious
justice
denomination
as
shall
provided
have the
for by
right
law.
to operate
Okay.
and protect
So
its
they've really
religious
thought about
sites
all
and
the
religious
different groups in
trusts
society.
as
Yeah, they
regulated
really
by
tried to
law.
be comprehensive.
That may need
No
special
person shall
protections.
act or make
Very
others
cool.
act
And then I guess
by
finally
using
to round
any
out this
means
section
against
on
public
rights,
health, decency,
are there
and
any
morality,
other kind of
or
important
breach
things
public
that are
peace,
guaranteed in this
or
Constitution?
convert another
Yeah,
person
there
from
are a
one
few
religion
more.
to
Okay,
another,
tell me about those.
Okay,
or
so
any
every
act or
person shall have
conduct
the right
that
to
may
Social
jeopardize
Security
others'
as provided
religion,
for by law.
and such
Every
act
consumer
shall
shall
be
have the right to
punishable
obtain
by law.
quality goods and
So
services
that's a lot in
and
one
shall be
sentence.
protected
It
from
sounds like
unfair
they're saying
trade
you have the right to
practices.
practice
Okay.
your
And
religion,
if damage is
Yeah.
caused to
but
any any
you can't,
consumer by the use of
incite
goods or
violence
services,
or do anything that's
every
harmful,
consumer
right,
shall
or
have
try
the
to
right to
forcibly
be
convert
compensated.
someone.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
Okay.
No
So they're trying
Nepali
to create a
citizen shall be
balance.
exiled.
so it's freedom
So
of
they can't kick you
religion,
out of the
but
country.
within
No.
the bounds
Okay,
of
I
Public
Fine.
order.
Finally,
public order.
Yeah.
any person
Now,
who is deprived of the
beyond
enjoyment
those
of the
kind of
rights conferred by
core
this
rights, like the
Constitution
right to property,
shall be
the right to
entitled to
free
obtain
speech, freedom
constitutional
of
remedies
religion.
from the
Yeah.
court as
The
provided for by
Constitution
law.
goes on
Okay.
to outline a
So
whole bunch
that's
of other
important,
rights.
right?
Yeah, that's
It
super
does.
important.
So
Your
I
rights
guess
are
just give me
violated,
like a
you can go to
broad
court.
overview
Yeah.
of what are
Now,
some of
this
those
is a
other rights.
very
Okay,
long
so
section
some
of
of
the
the other rights
Constitution we just went
include
over.
right
It
against
is.
exploitation.
All about fundamental
Okay.
rights.
And that
Yeah.
includes trafficking,
And,
slavery,
you know,
forced
it seems like they've
labor.
really thought about,
There's a right
pretty
to
much every
clean and
possible
healthy
right that
environment.
you could have.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And
if
then
your
after
health
that,
is
it switches
damaged
gears
due
and
to
talks about
environmental
the
pollution,
directive principles and policies
you have
of
a
the
right to
state.
compensation.
So,
Okay.
what
Interesting.
are these, and
right to
how are they
education.
different
Okay.
from
Which
the fundamental
includes
rights we were
free
just
and
talking
compulsory
about?
education
Okay,
up to
so
the basic level
these
and free
directive
education up to
principles
secondary
and
level.
policies
Okay.
of the state
And there are special
are
provisions
guidelines for the
citizens
governance
with
of the country.
disabilities or
Okay.
those from
Their
economically
goals and
disadvantaged
objectives for the
backgrounds.
state to
Okay.
achieve.
There's also
So they're
right
more
to
like
language and
aspirational.
culture.
Yeah.
Okay.
So everyone
Whereas
has the
the
right
fundamental
to
rights are
use their
actual
mother tongue
legal
and
rights.
participate
Okay.
in
So
cultural
these
life.
aren't
Okay.
enforceable
And
in
then there's
court.
the right
Okay,
to
so it's not like you
employment.
can sue the
Okay.
government
And
Right.
unemployment
for
benefits
not,
shall be provided
achieving
as
one of these
determined by
directive
federal law.
principles.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
So it's
So
kind
it's
of like a
just their
social safety
guiding
net
principles
Yeah.
for how
for
to
people
govern
who
the
are
country.
unemployed.
So what are some of the
Okay.
big objectives
And I know that the
that are laid
Constitution
out
also
in
goes on
these
to,
principles
you know,
and
kind of
policies?
guarantee
Well, they
certain
cover a
rights
lot of
for
different
specific
areas.
groups
Okay.
within
But generally,
society.
it's things
Yes,
like
it does. So
tell me
establishing a
about
system
those.
of public
Okay, so some of the
welfare
rights
based on
relating
social
to health
justice and economic
include
well-being,
the right to free
promoting national
basic health
unity and
services.
sovereignty, achieving
Everyone
sustainable
shall have the
economic
right
development by
relating to
mobilizing the
food
available
and
means and
food
resources of the
sovereignty as
country
provided for by
and
law.
enhancing the national
Every
dignity of
citizen shall have the
Nepal
right
in
to
the
appropriate
international
housing
arena.
Okay, so this
as
is really
provided for
kind of
by
like
law.
Okay.
the big picture
Women shall have
vision
equal
for
lineage
Nepal.
right
Okay.
It's their
without
long-term
any
goals.
discrimination
So it's
to
kind of like the
paternal
mission
property,
statement.
Exactly.
well
Okay,
as
so
to
it's very
obtain
general,
property
but within
acquired
that
by
there
her
are some
through her
specific
efforts.
policies,
Okay,
right?
so again,
what
this
are
is
some
kind
of
of
those?
So there are
reinforcing that
policies
gender
related to
equality.
strengthening national unity and
Every
safeguarding
woman
sovereignty.
shall have the right
Okay.
to safe motherhood
Policies
and
on
reproductive
political
health.
objectives,
Okay.
which focus
Women
on
shall be
upholding
protected from all
democratic
forms
norms,
of violence,
the
including
rule of
domestic
law, and human
violence.
rights.
Okay.
Women shall have the right to
Policies on
participate in all
economic
state
objectives,
bodies on the
which
basis of the
include
principle
creating
of
a
proportional inclusion.
socialism-oriented
Okay.
economy,
Women shall have equal
reducing
right
inequality
to special
and
opportunity
promoting
in
economic
education,
prosperity
employment,
for all.
health,
Okay.
and social
Policies
security.
on social
Okay,
justice
so they're
and
really trying
inclusion,
to
which
address
guide the state to
the
uplift
historical
historically backward
inequality that
groups
women have
and ensure
faced.
their
Yeah.
participation in all
Children
aspects
shall
of
have the right
national
to
life.
live with dignity.
Okay.
Okay.
Policies
Every
on
child shall have the right to
education,
name
health
identity,
environment,
and family care.
urban
Every
development,
child shall have the right to
foreign
basic
policy,
needs,
and good
including
governance.
education,
Wow, that's a lot.
healthcare,
Yeah, they've really
food,
tried to
shelter,
cover
All
and
their
recreation.
bases.
Wow.
Okay.
Every
And then
child
I
shall be
guess
protected from
underpinning
exploitation,
all of
abuse,
this is
and
the state's
violence.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Right.
Dalit
Like, what
shall
is
have
the
the right
state
to
obligated
proportional
to do?
inclusion
So
in
the
the state
Constitution
bodies
says it shall
and
be the
special
primary
opportunity in
obligation of the
education,
state to
employment,
make
health,
Nepal
and social security.
prosperous
Okay.
and
Dalit
affluent
shall have the
nation.
right to land
Okay.
and housing.
It shall be the
Dalit
duty
shall
of the
have the
state
right
to protect the
education,
fundamental rights
scholarship,
and human rights of
and
the
social
people,
security.
Okay.
and to diligently
Dalit shall have the
pursue
right to
the directive
participate in the public
principles
service
and gradually
as
implement
provided
the
for
state
by law.
policies
Okay.
to
The state
achieve
shall
the goal
protect and
of
promote
making
the
Nepal
traditional
a
occupation of
prosperous and
Dalit.
affluent
Okay.
nation.
Senior citizens
Okay, so
shall
it sounds
have the
like
right
it's their
special
job to make
protection
Nepal a
and
good
social
place to
security.
live
Okay.
Yeah.
by
Socially backward
upholding these
women,
rights and these
Dalit
principles.
indigenous
Exactly.
Very cool.
nationalities,
Now, obviously,
Badhizi Tharu Muslims,
beyond just
oppressed
the
class minorities,
obligations
and
of the state,
persons with
we also have to
disabilities
think about how
shall have the
Nepal
right
is
to
actually
participate in the
structured,
state bodies
how it's governed.
on the
Right.
basis
So it's a
of the
federal
principle
system,
of
right?
proportional
It is.
inclusion.
Okay, how does that work?
Economically,
So
socially,
Nepal
or
is a
educationally
federal
backward
democratic
groups
Republican state.
shall have the
Okay.
right to special
Sovereignty and
opportunity
state
in
authority
education,
vests in the Nepali
employment,
people
health, and
and shall
social
be
security
exercised in
as
accordance
provided
with the
for by
provisions
law.
of this
Okay.
Constitution.
Every
Okay,
person
so
with
again, they're
disabilities
reiterating that
shall have the
popular
right to live with
sovereignty
dignity,
idea.
Okay.
So
respect,
how is the
protection, and security.
Okay.
Persons with disabilities shall have the right to proportional inclusion in the state bodies and special opportunity in education, employment, health, and social security as provided for by law.
Okay.
Every victim of conflict shall have the right to rehabilitation, relief, compensation, and justice as provided for by law.
Okay. So they've really thought about all the different groups in society
Yeah, they really tried to be comprehensive.
that may need special protections.
Right.
Very cool. And then I guess finally, to round out this section on rights, are there any other kind of important things that are guaranteed in this Constitution?
Yeah, there are a few more.
Okay, tell me about those.
Okay, so every person shall have the right to Social Security as provided for by law. Every consumer shall have the right to obtain quality goods and services and shall be protected from unfair trade practices.
Okay.
And if damage is caused to any consumer by the use of goods or services, every consumer shall have the right to be compensated.
Okay, cool.
No Nepali citizen shall be exiled.
So they can't kick you out of the country?
No.
Okay,
And finally, any person who is deprived of the enjoyment of the rights conferred by this Constitution shall be entitled to obtain constitutional remedies from the court as provided for by law.
Okay. So that's important, right?
Yeah, that's super important.
If your rights are violated, you can go to court.
Yeah,
Now, this is a very long section of the Constitution we just went over.
it is.
All about fundamental rights.
Yeah.
And, it seems like they've really thought about, pretty much every possible right that you could have.
Yeah.
And then after that, it switches gears and talks about the directive principles and policies of the state.
Right.
So what are these and how are they different from the fundamental rights we were just talking about?
Okay, so these directive principles and policies of the state are guidelines for the governance of the country.
Okay.
They're goals and objectives for the state to achieve.
So they're more like aspirational.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas the fundamental rights are actual legal rights.
Okay.
So these aren't enforceable in court.
Okay. So it's not like you can sue the government
Right.
for not achieving one of these directive principles.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
So it's just their guiding principles for how to govern the country.
So what are some of the big objectives that are laid out in these principles and policies?
Well, they cover a lot of different areas.
Okay.
But generally, it's things like establishing a system of public welfare based on social justice and economic well-being, promoting national unity and sovereignty, achieving sustainable economic development by mobilizing the available means and resources of the country, and enhancing the national dignity of Nepal in the international arena.
Okay, so this is really kind of like the big picture vision for Nepal.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's their long-term goals.
So it's kind of like the mission statement.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's very general,
Yeah.
but within that, there are some specific policies, right?
Yeah.
So what are some of those?
So there are policies related to strengthening national unity and safeguarding sovereignty.
Okay.
Policies on political objectives, which focus on upholding democratic norms, the rule of law, and human rights.
Okay.
Policies on economic objectives, which include creating a socialism-oriented economy, reducing inequality, and promoting economic prosperity for all.
Okay.
Policies on social justice and inclusion, which guide the state to uplift historically backward groups and ensure their participation in all aspects of national life.
Okay.
Policies on education, health, environment, urban development, foreign policy, and good governance.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, they've really tried to cover.
All their bases.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess underpinning all of this is the state's responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is the state obligated to do?
So the Constitution says it shall be the primary obligation of the state to make Nepal prosperous and affluent nation.
Okay.
It shall be the duty of the state to protect the fundamental rights and human rights of the people, and to diligently pursue the directive principles and gradually implement the state policies to achieve the goal of making Nepal a prosperous and affluent nation.
Okay, so it sounds like it's their job to make Nepal a good place to live
Yeah.
by upholding these rights and these principles.
Exactly.
Very cool. Now, obviously, beyond just, the obligations of the state, we also have to think about how Nepal is actually structured, how it's governed.
Right.
So it's a federal system, right?
It is.
Okay, how does that work?
So Nepal is a federal democratic republican state.
Okay.
Sovereignty and state authority vests in the Nepali people and shall be exercised in accordance with the provisions of this constitution.
Okay, so again, they're reiterating that popular sovereignty
Yeah.
idea.
Okay.
So how is the